Vielleicht wird sich der eine oder andere über die etwas Rockpalast unübliche Szenerie hier wundern, aber wir befinden uns heute Abend hier in der Offenbacher Stadthalle und beim ersten Deutschlandkonzert von Loaf. Neben mir sitzt Loaf, der Sänger der Band, links von mir Jim Steinman, der Komponist, Arrangeur und Texter der Stücke. Well, you guys look like one of the most unlikely couple in rock today. How did you actually get together?
We got together doing theater in New York City. He auditioned for me for a play I'd written music and lyrics for it. He came and auditioned for a role in it.
You met him in New York City?
Right.
What did you do before you formed that group?
I did a lot of theater and rock and roll. Mainly theater, though, professionally. I had written rock and roll for a long time, but I spent most of the years after I got out of college doing theater for organizations in New York, musical theater and regular theater, writing plays and music and lyrics.
And what did you do, Mead?
Just went from Texas all around the country, United States, doing rock and roll theater, films, television, you name it. I've done it except writing. I've never written anything. Well, I've written songs, but they're really bad. So that's, you know, you gotta, when you're a singer, you need a songwriter, and if you can't write yourself, look for somebody in perfect team. I did things like with Motown, had an act called Stony Meatloaf, Ted Nugent, the Rocky Horror Show, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Shakespeare in the Park, New York Shakespeare Festival, a lot of things. Rock and roll is my first love, so that's what I'm doing now. I get it, drums in the background.
Sorry. Jim, your songs, they deal a lot with teenage romance, motorcycles, cars. What kind of perspective do you have when you write these songs?
Well, obviously extremely warped. And mainly, I think romantic's the key word. I think of the album as, instead of being an album of just 7 songs, I think of it as a fairly unified collection of 7 visions or dreams. Every song I think of as a separate vision or a separate dream, or even an adventure. It's like when you start playing the record, it's setting off on a voyage, on a series of adventures through this kingdom, this world. And it just so happens that almost all the people in the world are teenagers. That's just because I think that's the best kind of world. If you have a world only of teenagers, at least musically, for the course of one record, you're bound to get a lot of excitement, a lot of romance, a lot of violence, a lot of chills and fever, a lot of sex. And those are all very good things, a lot of motorcycles.
Great.
I mean, it beats Perry Como, doesn't it?
Sure. Actually,
Don't talk about Perry Como like that. I'm doing a duet album with him next year. Him and Dean Martin. I'm insulted.
What do you do?
A duet album with Perry Como.
And what are you doing?
What am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm playing the piano.
Oh, great. When did you start working on that album, Battle of Hell?
Very late 1976. But most of it was done through 1977. It was released in late 1977. It was about a year's project, a year's worth of work just in the studio. And about a year before that, just piano and voice.
And how did you get in touch with Todd Rundgren? I mean, he's a very, he's a very fast guy, you know. It's hard to get hold on him. How did you get in touch with him?
That was through a keyboard player who had played with Todd named Moogie Klingman. Played in a band of Todd's called Utopia. Just heard us just with piano and voice. I was very impressed, thought Todd might be interested. Todd doesn't really like to produce, only if he feels challenged or that it would be exciting. Otherwise, he gets bored very easily. He's got an incredibly fast mind and gets very easily bored. And this, he seemed to think, was a project he wouldn't get bored with, and he didn't.
When Todd produced Grand Funk, he spent 2 weeks of reading comic books at the control board. Yeah, that was a story that, I mean, you know, everybody said, oh, Todd Rundgren. He reads comic books when he's producing your record. He only had a comic book once, and that was during a string session. Spider-Man.
How long did it take recording that album?
Altogether, it was almost a year. The actual instrumental tracks were recorded. They were on and off because Todd kept leaving to go to Europe and Japan. But the actual time in the studio for the basic tracks was only about 3 weeks. But there was an enormous amount of time spent rehearsing before that first with just piano and voice, then with the band, and then an enormous amount of time mixing the tracks, polishing everything up. So altogether, it's about a year's worth of work just on the record.
Are you already working on another project?
Just starting to, yes.
Yeah, any idea when that one will be
Early
released?
next year.
Oh, great.
You're afraid of me, boy. I can tell you, you're afraid of me. You told me not to send him up beforehand, right?
Yeah.
Didn't you tell me that? Yeah, you're afraid to talk to me, huh? Yeah, he's
No,
scared.
I'm not. Where did you get that name from?
Which name?
Meatloaf.
Oh, Meatloaf.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. From playing football in America. American football, you know, helmet, not soccer.
When was that?
1960. I've had Meatloaf, the name Meatloaf, for 18 years. Oops. Well, you don't know how old I was when I got it, so that, there you go.
Great. Okay, did you expect the success you had with that album? I mean, it's platinum in Canada, it's gold in Australia, it's #1 in the moment in Australia. Did you expect that when you started?
Well, I certainly didn't expect gold in Australia. I didn't even think about Australia. But I think we expected that if it could be heard by enough people, it would have a tremendous success. Because the emotional power is in the record. And at least I feel like most of the rock and roll music the last few years has been pretty boring, pretty bland, and pretty mild compared to what it had been. And I think this is sort of a step ahead in that it's a return. I mean, if you want to call it motorcycle music, I almost think of it as motorcycle music just because I think it gives you the same feeling you might get when you're on a motorcycle going over 100 miles an hour. It's just that excitement and that feverish quality. And I think that's something people really like from rock and roll. It's something that rock and roll does best. So and even the ballads are pretty strong. I mean, if you could have ballads on a motorcycle, they're motorcycle ballads. So I think that we both felt that if people got a chance to hear it, it would have a real impact.
Another question, how did you get that current road band together?
Oh, the
Where
rock
are these musicians from?
Okay, we saw 1,200 musicians in about 7 months, Jim and myself, and our excuse me, road manager Sam Ellis. We saw about 1,200 musicians, and they came through those. But actually, it's like we put ads in papers in the States, you know, like Village Voice, Rolling Stone, things like that. But if anybody that answered the ad, we never got any musician from the ads themselves. Just through word of mouth, through people who'd been to the auditions, did we get our musicians. We've been out on the road now since October the 29th of 77, and we'll stay out on the road maybe until the middle of October, almost a whole year once we started.
Did any of these guys or of that girl play in the name group?
Carla.
Yeah, play in the name group before.
Yeah, one of the guitar players was this Alice Cooper. I replaced Steve Hunter and did the Dick Wagner and him played together with Alice Cooper. And then the keyboard player was with the other keyboard player, the organ player was with Carly Simon before. That's the only two people who really were with any name groups. I mean, they were John Cale and things like that, but you know, mostly just like local bands and things like that. You know, there's only two big name bands, Carly Simon and Alice Cooper.
Where's Carla from?
She's from a band called Orchestra Luna. That's what she did for like 2 years before she came with us. And she came with us due to the fact that the duet that we do, Paradise by the Dashboard Light, on the album, was originally done on the album by Ellen Foley. And Ellen was committed to this TV show in the States and a few other things, so she didn't really want to come out on the road. So I'd seen Carla about 2 years before and said that she'd be real good. And then I had to convince other people. Carla's fantastic. I always sing with, I put it this way, I always sing with women. From the time I started, 1967, whenever. It's sort of like Beauty and the Beast trip, you know? And so I'm the beauty and they're the beast. And so, yeah, Stony and Meatloaf, she was the beast, I was the beauty. Always been that way, you know?
What do you think about that record?
What, Stony and Meatloaf?
Yeah.
You can burn it. If you own a copy, burn the damn thing. I don't want to see it, you know? People come up with it. They're getting ready to re-release it. I can't believe it. I hate that record. I had nothing to do with the record other than it said Meatloaf, and I did a few vocals. This record, though, I was very close to. Worked, you know, I mean, I was there every minute almost. Until I got tired, and then they were there every minute, and I wasn't there anymore.
With which people are you going to work on that second album? another Todd Rundgren band?
Well, it'll be a mixture of some of the people of before and this band, and be a lot of people working on this record, because we really like our band, so we want to keep the band together as much as possible. So they'll be working on the record. Todd is producing the next record. We hope to start somewhere in November on it. Jimmy's going to go off the road in the States, pretty much, start working on the next record, and the band and myself going to continue to travel. So it should be interesting. We should all be completely dead by then. I mean, we're all, out of it now anyway. We're completely crazy. After you've been on the road for a year, going, and we'll have been all over the world, literally. We get through, because we leave, this is in Frankfurt, we go to Hamburg, then we go to Australia. We come back to Hawaii, and then back west, like to San Diego, LA, San Francisco, and then maybe back here again.
What kind of reviews have you got for that first album? What were they like?
Both ways. But you mean the album or the show?
The album and the show.
All right. Well,
let's start with
I'll tell you what. The live show, I've read, to be honest, I've read about probably 600 reviews of the live show, and I've read 4 bad.
Do you read them, actually?
Yeah, I read them. I've read about 4 bad reviews for the live show, out of about 600. Album reviews, about 8 good to 8 out of 10 were good, which ain't bad. It's like 2 out of 3, same as, ain't bad. Little plug. Because our single 2 out of 3 ain't bad in the States is number 11, and so things are doing real well. We're pretty excited.
How is the second one going to be?
The second one's going to be great. Second one, people always ask us, hey, how can you make the second one as good as the first one? Well, we learned so much doing the first one that I can't see us. We strive for perfection, so nothing will go out that's not as good, if not better, than the last one. That's how we feel about it.
Jim, can you tell us a bit about your musical background, your musical tastes, which stand to that album?
Well, when I was growing up, the first music that I really loved was, interestingly enough, since we're in Germany, was German music. I grew up listening to Wagner and Little Richard, and I used to play Elvis, Little Richard, and Jerry Lee Lewis, and then I'd switch over to Tristan and Isolde, then I'd switch back to Little Richard, and that's enough to make you totally demented right there. But after I finished listening to that in the 60s, that was in the late 50s when I first started listening to music, I always listened to opera, always loved opera and classical music. Then I was a big Beach Boys fan. I loved the Beach Boys and the Who. They were my favorite groups, along with the Stones and the Beatles and the Kinks. English groups, mainly English groups. And in the 70s, I haven't liked too much except my own music and Bruce Springsteen's. So those are the major ones.
What will the second one be like? Can you tell us a bit about it? Will it be similar to the first one?
It'll probably be similar. It'll probably be just as strong, just as muscular. I think of this as being a very muscular album. I don't know how different. The only difference may be there may not be so many long songs because I might be more tired. But I think that it'll be just as defiant and rebellious and exultant.
And can you tell us already what kind of themes you will deal with, lyric-wise?
I don't know enough about what the songs are going to be yet to know.
No motorcycles?
I don't know if there'll be any motorcycle songs completely, but I'm sure a motorcycle will pop up in there. A lot of the same imagery. One thing is I know the songs will be just as visual. I think of all these songs like little films. I think of the whole album as one whole film, and I think it'll be just as much a film. Whether it'll be like Star Wars or Psycho, I don't know. But
I hate to do this to us, but we got to cut it because we got to get ready to go on. We're going to see you afterwards, or that was the scam I heard before? I mean, that's what I heard before. Yeah. Is that true? Yeah. Yeah? All right. We got. I hate to cut it now, but I got to get ready to go on. Okay. All right.
Thanks a lot.
See you
thanks.
Hi, y'all.